On December 22nd, 2019, Peloton stock dropped nearly 10% in a single day. Not because of a product recall, not because of a data breach, not because a competitor released something better, but because of a 2-minute Christmas commercial. The ad showed a husband gifting his wife a Peloton bike for the holidays. She filmed herself riding it every day for a year, documented her journey, and at the end, grateful, glowing, she thanked him for it. That was it. That was the whole ad. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed over 18 million times. Not because people loved it, because they were furious. Comedians tore it apart. Journalists wrote think pieces. A Twitter thread describing the wife's expression as haunted and trapped went viral overnight. One critic called it a dystopian short film about a woman being surveilled by her husband. $942 million in market value, gone in 2 days. The actress who played the wife got so much attention from the blowback that she was cast in a gin commercial the following week, one that openly mocked Peloton. And that ad got millions of views too. But here's the thing almost nobody talks about. The commercial wasn't even the real problem. It was just the match. Peloton had been soaking in gasoline for months. This is how the story of one of the hottest companies in America let a single marketing miscalculation expose every crack in its foundation, and how a brand worth $8 billion started unraveling in real time. To understand why that commercial hit so differently, you have to understand what Peloton actually was in 2019. Peloton launched in 2012. The founder, John Foley, was a former Barnes & Noble executive who wanted a boutique fitness class experience without leaving his house. The pitch was simple: $2,245 for a stationary bike with a tablet bolted to the front, streaming live and on-demand cycling classes from instructor celebrities in a Manhattan studio. It was SoulCycle, but at home. It was Netflix, but for your body, and for a very specific kind of person. It was perfect. By 2019, Peloton had grown to $915 million in annual revenue, up from $435 million the year before. They had 1.4 million members. Their Net Promoter Score, the measure that measures how likely customers are to recommend a product, was sitting around 91 out of 100. Apple's hovers around 72. Peloton's customers weren't just satisfied, they were evangelical. The company went public in September 2019. Wall Street was skeptical, but Peloton's leadership wasn't worried. They had momentum. They had a cult following. They had a product people genuinely loved. But underneath all of that was a tension they'd never fully resolve. Peloton's entire brand identity had been built around aspiration. The imagery was sleek, minimal, expensive looking. The instructors were attractive and intense. Everything about the brand whispered, "This is for people who have arrived." People with the right apartment, the right income, the right lifestyle. That was intentional. Fully understood, they weren't just selling exercise equipment. They were selling identity. And identity products live or die on who they make you feel like when you use them. The problem? That identity had a ceiling. The people who desperately wanted a Peloton and could already afford one. They already had one. The next wave of growth meant reaching slightly beyond that core customer. People who weren't already sold on the lifestyle. People who might look at a $2,245 bike and need to feel like it was worth it. Not just financially, but socially. And competition wasn't sitting still. Nordic Track and Echelon were selling connected fitness bikes at half the price. Mirror had just raised $34 million for a smart workout mirror. Apple Fitness Plus was on the horizon. The window where Peloton had the premium connected fitness market essentially to itself, that window was closing. So, in the second half of 2019, Peloton made a decision. They were going big on marketing. Not just digital ads, not just Instagram, television. A full holiday campaign targeting gift givers. Specifically, the spouses and partners of people who might want a Peloton but hadn't pulled the trigger yet. On paper, It made complete sense. The holidays are the single biggest sales window for home fitness equipment. Framing the bike as a gift tapped into a completely different purchasing mindset, and a polished TV spot could reach millions of people outside Peloton's existing digital bubble. In execution, it became one of the most studied marketing disasters in modern brand history. What Peloton was trying to do, strategically, was actually pretty clear. They wanted to shift the gift giver's perspective. Up until this point, most Peloton marketing had spoken directly to the person who would use the bike. Personal, motivational. You can do this. You deserve this. But holiday advertising doesn't work that way. Holiday advertising talks to the buyer, and it tries to make them feel like this purchase is an act of love, not just a transaction. So the brief, as best as can be reconstructed, was essentially this: show a couple, show the gift of a Peloton, and show how it changes the recipient's life over the course of a year. Make it warm, make it aspirational, make the viewer feel like giving someone a Peloton is giving them something meaningful. The actress cast as the wife was Monica Ruiz, a Los Angeles-based actress with a minimal public profile at the time. The husband, the bike, the beautiful home, the grateful smile at the end, clean, well-produced. By conventional standards of holiday advertising, it checked every box. And it's important to understand, before getting to why it failed, that the logic behind it was actually sound. Peloton's existing customers loved the brand with a ferocity most companies can only dream about. Internal research consistently showed that members felt like the bike had genuinely changed their lives. There were Peloton Facebook groups with hundreds of thousands of members sharing workout milestones. People were getting Peloton tattoos. The transformation narrative, "I started writing and my life got better," wasn't manufactured. It was real. It was what actual customers said, unprompted, every single day. So building an ad around that transformation story felt like the most authentic thing they could do. Ground the campaign in the truth of what customers actually experienced. The problem was the cultural context they were dropping it into. 2019 was not a neutral moment for stories about women, husbands, bodies, and gifts. The conversation around gender dynamics, around the male gaze, around women's autonomy. It was live, it was sharp, and it was sitting there, waiting for exactly this kind of material. An ad showing a husband gifting his wife fitness equipment, with the implicit suggestion that she should spend a year improving her body and then thank him for it? To Peloton's core customer, that's not what the ad said at all. To them, it was a story about dedication, a woman who committed to something and felt proud of herself. But to everyone else, it looked like something very different. And everyone else was exactly who Peloton had just spent millions of dollars making sure would see it. The ad launched quietly. It ran on TV, it ran online, and for about the first week, almost nobody noticed it. Then, a single tweet changed everything. On December 2nd, 2019, a writer named Ava Victor posted a satirical thread written from the perspective of the wife in the commercial. It was devastating in its precision, capturing what she described as the character's barely concealed anxiety, her compulsive need to document every ride as proof of compliance, her hollow smile at the end. Tens of thousands of retweets within hours. From there, it cascaded fast. The New York Times ran a piece, the Washington Post ran a piece. Every cultural website that needed traffic that week found their answer in the Peloton ad. Late-night hosts picked it up. Comedians on social media filled the void that SNL couldn't, since they were on holiday break. The criticisms came in waves. First, the body image angle. She was already thin. Why did she need the bike? The implication being her husband thought she needed to lose weight and she spent a year obediently complying. Then, the surveillance angle. She filmed herself every single day. Why? For herself, or so her husband could monitor her progress? The more people watched it, the more the details started to feel sinister rather than sweet. Then, the class angle. The commercial was set in an expensive, immaculate home. She had a husband who could casually drop $2,245 on a gift. And she spent her year exercising alone in a beautiful apartment. There was something about the sanitized perfection of it that people found alienating, even dystopian. Peloton's response was almost worse than the ad itself. They released a statement saying the ad was mischaracterized. They stood behind it. They didn't pull it. They didn't apologize. They essentially told the public, "You're reading this wrong," which, in a media firestorm, is the equivalent of pouring water on a grease fire. By December 10th, their stock had dropped over 15% from where it had been before the ad went viral. The market cap loss was approaching $1 billion. The story had evolved from "people are mad about a commercial" to "investors are losing confidence in Peloton's judgment." And that's actually the more important story, because the stock drop wasn't really about the ad. Here's what's actually happening underneath the surface. Peloton had gone public just 3 months earlier, in September 2019, at $29 a share. The IPO had been considered disappointing. The stock actually dropped on its first day of trading. Wall Street already had questions about whether a $2,000+ stationary bike company could sustain the kind of growth its valuation implied. Then the ad hit, and suddenly the story wasn't just bad commercial. It was, does this company understand its customers? Does it understand its market? Does its leadership have the judgment to navigate the next phase of growth? The ad became a Rorschach test for investor confidence. If Peloton's marketing team, the people responsible for communicating the brand to the world, could produce something this tone-deaf and then defend it publicly, what did that say about the company's leadership culture? That's what spooked investors. Not the Twitter backlash, the response to the Twitter backlash. There's a concept in crisis communications called the secondary crisis. The damage that comes not from the original incident, but from how an organization handles it. Peloton's primary crisis was a bad ad. Their secondary crisis was a tone-deaf response that made them look defensive and out of touch. And secondary crises are almost always more damaging than the first one. Monica Ruiz, the actress from the ad, handled it better than the company did. She acknowledged the controversy with grace, didn't throw Peloton under the bus, and within days was cast in that Ryan Reynolds aviation gin ad, playing the same character, sitting at a bar with friends, visibly processing something traumatic, wordlessly drinking. Reynolds' production company produced it in under 36 hours. It was a masterclass in reactive marketing. That ad got 50 million views in its first week. Peloton issued a new statement saying they were disappointed in the gin ad and surprised that Ryan Reynolds had taken advantage of the situation, which, again, somehow made things worse. Now, to be fair to Peloton, the commercial didn't destroy the company. That framing, while great for a headline, isn't quite accurate. After the controversy died down, Peloton's sales actually held up reasonably well through the 2019 holiday season. Then, COVID happened in early 2020, and demand for home fitness equipment exploded. Peloton's stock went from the low $20 to over $160 at its peak in January 2021. The company added hundreds of thousands of new subscribers. For a brief moment, it genuinely looked like the crisis had been completely overwritten by circumstance. But the cracks that the company exposed, they didn't go away. They just got papered over. The core tension was still there. Peloton was a luxury product trying to achieve mass market scale without compromising the luxury identity that made it desirable in the first place. That's an almost impossible balance to maintain. As COVID restrictions lifted and gyms reopened, Peloton's growth stalled. They had pulled forward years of demand into a compressed window. By 2022, their stock had collapsed back below $20. There were reports of bikes piling up in warehouses, unable to move. The company did a massive round of layoffs. Fully resigned as CEO, the board brought in a restructuring expert. By 2023, Peloton was fighting for survival, exploring partnership deals, licensing agreements, anything to stabilize the business. The commercial didn't cause all of that, but it was a signal that the company had a blind spot when it came to how the wider world perceived its brand, that it was so deep inside its own ecosystem, so surrounded by evangelist customers and internal believers, that it had lost the ability to see itself from the outside. That's a dangerous place for any brand to be, and it's especially dangerous when you've just gone public and you're trying to grow beyond your core. So, what's the actual takeaway here? Because this isn't just a story about a bad ad. Every major brand disaster has a version of this pattern. A company gets successful, it builds a strong internal culture, a loyal customer base, a clear sense of its own identity. And then, precisely because of that success, it loses the ability to hear feedback that doesn't confirm what it already believes. Peloton's customers loved the ad. Internal testing probably showed positive numbers. The team making the commercial were true believers in the product and the lifestyle. They genuinely couldn't see why anyone would interpret it negatively. That's a trap. When everyone in the room shares the same assumptions, nobody catches the blind spot. There's a useful test that some brands use before releasing any major creative work, sometimes called a cold eyes review, where people who have zero connection to the brand or the project watch the material with fresh eyes and report their unfiltered reactions. Not focus groups of existing customers, actual strangers. If Peloton had done that, if they'd shown that commercial to a room of people who'd never heard of Peloton, who weren't already invested in the lifestyle, who didn't already love the brand, they might have caught it. They might have seen the raised eyebrow, the uncomfortable laugh, the, wait, is this supposed to be sweet or is this kind of messed up? They didn't. Or if they did, they didn't listen. And $942 million later, that lesson became very expensive. Peloton's story isn't over. The company is still operating, still has millions of loyal subscribers, still makes a product that genuinely works for a lot of people. But that December morning 2019, when the stock ticker started dropping and the tweets kept coming, that was the moment the myth started cracking. The moment when the gap between who Peloton thought they were and how the rest of the world saw them became impossible to ignore. One commercial, 2 minutes, $942 million. Not because the ad was evil, not because the people who made it were bad at their jobs, just because nobody in the room asked the right question. How is someone who doesn't already love us going to see this? That question costs nothing to ask. The answer apparently can cost everything.